In 1882, a philosopher wrote of a madman who ran into the marketplace at high noon, lantern in hand, screaming, "God is dead, and we have killed him." This was a desperate alarm. Nietzsche saw a catastrophe forming on the horizon, a collapse of the structures that had held Western civilization together for 1,000 years. He was describing an impending vacuum of meaning. Without a supreme authority to dictate value, the psychological weight of existence would become a burden few could carry. 143 years later, the symptoms Nietzsche predicted appear in our headlines and our screens. We are now the subjects of his investigation. Friedrich Nietzsche's prophecies began with his own suffering. The son of a Lutheran pastor who died of a brain disease when Friedrich was only 5, he spent his life haunted by a sense of profound loss. He was a prodigy. By age 24, he was appointed to a professorship at the University of Basel, seemingly destined for a brilliant academic career. But his body failed him. Chronic migraines and vomiting forced him to abandon his post. He became a nomad, wandering the Swiss Alps and Italian towns in solitude, writing while his health deteriorated. On January 3, 1889, his cognitive life reached its end. In a square in Turin, Nietzsche witnessed a horse being beaten. He reportedly wept, threw his arms around the animal's neck, and collapsed into permanent mental darkness. While Nietzsche lived out his final 11 years in a vegetative state, his sister, Elizabeth, took control of his estate. She edited his unpublished notes to align with the rising Nazi ideology, the very nationalism and anti-Semitism her brother had despised. To hear the actual warning, we have to look past a century of propaganda and find the truth in the chaotic, unedited work he left behind. Nietzsche understood that a crisis of this scale required more than dry academic logic. Pure reason was too small for a world losing its soul. He responded with "Thus Spoke Zarathustra." This was a philosophical novel and a mock Bible, using the voice of an ancient prophet to strike the subconscious through myth and metaphor. He subtitled it, "A Book for All and None." He knew many would read the words, but few would face the danger they described. The book remains a visceral diagnosis of our modern world. Nietzsche's Death of God describes the collapse of Western civilization's operating system. For a millennium, all human morality and meaning were guaranteed by this single metaphysical foundation. Without it, humanity enters an ideological freefall. We find ourselves desperately reaching for absolute truths that are no longer there. This collapse leaves us with an ultimatum. We either take on the burden of creating our own meaning, or we sink into a comfortable, numb apathy. Nietzsche had a name for those who refused that burden. He called them the last men. These are passive nihilists. They despise risk. They avoid greatness. They seek only biological safety and mild, reliable entertainment. We see this diagnosis in our own pursuit of frictionless comfort, a tech-driven culture that prioritizes security and convenience over any higher purpose. Zarathustra watches with horror as these people proudly claim they have invented happiness because they have removed all suffering from their lives. The last man is the default goal of modern society. In many ways, it is a goal we have already achieved. Zarathustra's alternative to this apathy is the Übermensch, the overman. To understand this ideal, we must set aside the 20th century distortions of master races and political domination. The Übermensch is an individual who accepts the death of otherworldly hopes and takes full responsibility for forging values here on Earth. In his teachings, Zarathustra describes the present human condition as a highly precarious transition, a thin rope stretched directly over a bottomless abyss. In this view, humanity is a bridge, not a destination. We are a bridge between the animal and the Übermensch. But walking that bridge requires passing a final, sanity-breaking test. It requires a level of psychological strength that Nietzsche considered his most terrifying insight. He ultimately called this brutal psychological test the heaviest thought, the terrifying and inescapable doctrine of the eternal recurrence.
God is dead, leaving the last men to huddle within the ruins of old meanings and seek hollow comfort. This collapse has opened an existential void that most people are terrified to look into. Zarathustra views the Übermensch as a direction, a dangerous, continuous crossing over this abyss. It is a path forward for those who refuse to stay in the ruins. But walking the rope is only the beginning. Zarathustra has yet to reveal his most destructive teaching, a concept that nearly shattered his mind. To withstand the impending weight of this thought, the spirit must first undergo a psychological dismantling. It must be cleared of its old shape to make room for a new existence. This dismantling happens in 3 stages. First, the camel kneels to carry the massive burden of inherited morality, the command of "thou shalt." Then the camel becomes a lion, destroying these old values, replacing the external load with a defiant "I will." The lion captures freedom, but it cannot populate the space it clears. It can say no to the past, but it remains unable to forge a new future. Creation requires the final stage, the child. This is a spirit of forgetting and new beginnings. The child represents unburdened play and the ability to say a sacred yes to the world. Shedding inherited burdens to find the freedom of the child serves as the necessary preparation. It builds the psychological resilience required to confront the terror of Nietzsche's ultimate test. In 1881, while walking near Lake Silvaplana in Switzerland, Nietzsche encountered an idea so heavy that it left him unable to write for 6 weeks. He imagined a demon creeping into your loneliest moment to ask a question. What if you had to live this exact life, as you are living it now, over again, infinitely? The loop is total. Every pain, joy, and mundane moment would return in sequence, repeating through an eternity of identical cycles. For most, this thought brings immediate despair. The prospect of reliving every failure without alteration becomes the greatest weight imaginable. Nietzsche used this idea as an ethical diagnostic tool. It strips away future comfort and reveals whether you are actively choosing your life or merely enduring it. If the thought of infinite return breaks you, it proves your current life is built on a hollow foundation. Surviving it requires discovering a different kind of internal drive. The force capable of answering the demon is the will to power. Nietzsche identified this as the fundamental drive in all living things. It is distinct from a mere drive to survive. Life does not just want to continue, it wants to grow, expand, and exceed its limits. While later twisted to justify political tyranny, Nietzsche's original concept had nothing to do with dominating others. Real will to power is the struggle for self-mastery. The individual acts as sculptor and marble, ruthlessly chiseling away weaknesses to overcome themselves. Through this inward mastery, you stop being a passenger in your own life. You begin to shape an existence that you would willingly choose to live forever. This is the conclusion of Nietzsche's project, Amor Fati, the love of fate. This is an active, full-throated embrace. It bypasses the quiet endurance of the Stoic and the deferred hope of the religious, to love what is, exactly as it is. It requires loving even your worst mistakes and your deepest suffering. These are the necessary conditions that forged you. To wish them away is to wish away yourself. Amor Fati is the only answer to the demon. If you truly love your fate, you would meet the prospect of infinite repetition with an enthusiastic yes. Having found solitary freedom on the heights, Zarathustra reaches a paradox. He cannot remain in isolation. He must descend. He refers to this as the gift-giving virtue. Great self-overcoming creates an overflow of wisdom that compels the individual to return and share their insights with the ordinary world. Humanity often rejects the gift, but the cycle must continue. The heights are for finding the truth. The descent is for testing its value. The demon has asked the question, are you still carrying burdens that were never yours, or are you finally ready to become who you are?